So the next speaker, well, just to introduce him, Bruce Knott directs the Unitarian Universalist Office at the United Nations, but has had a long career in diplomatic service for the United States, long and colorful career, and also heads currently the Human Rights Committee at the United Nations for the NGOs. And so I just wanted to mention that, we hear of some initiatives on the ground in Burma, very important. The Archbishop of Yangon has spoken out against hate speech. There's a recent, maybe a youth-led project with flowers against hate speech. But those are small scale, important, maybe effective. But looking in the international sphere, what kind of interfaith or diplomatic work have you seen, and what do you think might be helpful?
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be here. My many years, first as a Peace Corps volunteer, and then later working for the World Bank, and finally as a U.S. diplomat overseas. Living and working around the world, it sort of gives you the opportunity to see issues from different points of view. And I think most Americans, looking at the media that we we have a tendency to adopt a certain narrative, and particularly when it comes to religion. I think we see Buddhists generally as calm and peaceful and nice, and Muslims as not so much. And this issue, which is a real issue and not necessarily the narrative that we watch on television a lot, actually turns that narrative on its head. And there are actually many other examples that we could point out where very good religions, and I think all religions are good, have done very bad things. And sometimes very good religions also provoke bad things. And so I think we're seeing something that's a bit novel in this particular case for most Americans, because it contradicts the narrative that we see on our TV and listen to on the radio all the time. And as I said, living and working overseas as I have done, it's easier for me to see that there are nuances and differences that don't necessarily conform to what you see on Fox News or even on CNN or some of these other outlets. One of the biggest problems in any sort of crisis or human rights issue is silence. This was the great slogan of the AIDS campaign here in New York City and around America, that silence equals death. And particularly with the Rohingya, for far too long, there's been a lot of silence on this issue. And there's some reasons that we've heard today that this is not an issue that has gotten a lot of press attention until just lately. It's beginning to pick up with some press attention in the New York Times. I wish everybody read the New York Times. It doesn't necessarily happen. I don't know if it's hit Fox News yet, but anyway. But when a crisis does not get attention, people can be excused for not knowing about it. If you're sitting in your living room and you're turning on the news and you don't hear about something, how can you get energized about it? And this is why these kinds of panel discussions are important, to raise up an issue that many people don't know about. And it's one of the things that we try to do at the Unitarian Universalist United Nations office, is lift up issues that other people are ignoring. And that's why this is a very important issue for us. So how do interfaith NGOs or secular NGOs deal with problems? That's kind of what I want to deal with a little bit. First of all, is to bring attention. You have to shine a light on an issue. And again, this has been an issue that for far too long people just didn't know about. And this issue didn't just happen yesterday. It's been going on for years and years and years. Whole communities of Muslims, children, women, have been deprived of livelihood, health care, education, because of who they are, and for no other reason whatsoever. And we have not heard this story. We have heard the story of political reform in Burma. And there is this narrative that we've heard about from the previous speaker, where you have a narrative, things are getting better in Burma. They are getting more democratic, and the international community is beginning to open up to Burma. And that there's some truth in that story, and that's a wonderful story, but that's not all the story. In the midst of some political reforms, there is also this terrible repression. And I'm going to begin to use a word which is a very dangerous word in the United Nations, because it carries a lot of force with it. Genocide. When you take a group of people and you want to obliterate them, when you want to do away with them, that approaches the definition of genocide. And whether we've actually crossed the actual legal definition of what genocide is, we're certainly getting very close to that boundary if we haven't already crossed it. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an international lawyer, so I can't say with any authority whether we've crossed that boundary yet or not. But I think I know enough about international law and genocide to know that we're very close to it. And we ought to be concerned anytime we get this close to wiping out an entire group of people because of their ethnicity, because of their religion. We're getting very close to that terrible word, genocide. So first of all, we need to bring attention to the problem. We're beginning to get some press attention, we're getting some congressional attention, and that's a good thing. We need to be persistent in whatever we do. We have this tendency, and I talk about this all the time in my advocacy on human rights, is that we'll go out and we'll just get the biggest demonstration ever, and we'll just walk in front of the White House and we're going to solve the problem. And I wish that were true. And big demonstrations certainly have their usage, but one demonstration is not going to do it. It has to be one after another after another. You've got to keep issues alive until they're resolved, and that means persistence. To do it again and again and again, and do it when people are beginning to lose interest, and just keep up at it until the issue is resolved. And then patience, because it takes patience. It's very difficult in this kind of struggle, when you're struggling for the human rights of a people, to be patient and to be persistent and to be patient and keep at it until the job is done. And sort of the corollaries to attention, persistence, and patience are education, which is what attention is all about. That's what we're trying to do here, is to educate people. Agitation. You need to not only inform people as to what is happening, you need to agitate them. You need to get them pushed and motivated to do something. And then mobilization. And mobilization is all about building community organizing. A lot of people have mentioned the fact that President Obama was a community organizer. Jesus Christ was a community organizer. Lots of community organizers in history. You've got to organize a community. Part of organizing communities, too, is organizing networks and building coalitions. And people that care about human rights generally, whatever human rights they happen to be concerned about, ought to care about this issue. Martin Luther King and others have said this, if anyone's human rights are violated anywhere, everybody's human rights are violated everywhere. So we need to build coalitions with all those people that care about human rights to get energized on this particular topic. And I'll have to say that the first time I actually got some detailed information about this was a talk I heard by the special advisor to the UN Secretary General on genocide. And he's very concerned about this issue, because this does fit the definition, or if not totally fit it, it's coming very close to fitting. And one of the goals of the UN, the Office of the UN Special Advisor on Genocide, is to prevent genocide. We don't want to get to a point where we wait till genocide happens and go, oh, well, it happened, now we have to do something about it. No, the goal is to prevent it before it's happened. I would say in this case there's been enough that's already happened to indicate that there are certainly crimes against humanity, and perhaps even crossing that very terrible line into genocide. The UN, I have to give my little plug for the UN. A lot of people, particularly Americans, don't think that the UN has a very prominent role to play. And that's primarily in this country, the United States of America, whose idea it was to have a United Nations. This has been, the League of Nations was an American idea, the United Nations was an American idea, and yet it's the Americans that seem to have the least faith or trust in the UN. One of the things that the UN does very well is create standards. And certainly in the area of human rights, it's the best. There really is no other organization that has ever done as good a job of making standards of human rights as the United Nations. Right after the Second World War, you had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I still think is one of the best documents ever created. There are further documents that have been passed by the United Nations, like the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the elimination of discrimination against women, the UN Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and members of their families, and on and on and on, which define and codify and make standards of what human rights behavior is all supposed to be about. One of the things that now happens at the Human Rights Council in Geneva is the Universal Periodic Review, which is a way that the UN community can monitor the behavior of nations, and every nation gets reviewed every 4.5 years on their human rights performance. What's somewhat lacking within the UN system is enforcement. We certainly can point out countries that are violating human rights. We can monitor their human rights performance. We have a good standard of what human rights are, and these are two things that the UN has done a very good job of giving us. The best the UN can do when it comes to enforcement is what they call shaming and blaming. And the UN tries to do that by holding up countries and looking at their performance and shaming and blaming countries. It actually hasn't done much with Burma. There hasn't been a lot of shaming and blaming, a little bit at the UN, but there certainly could be more. And I think it's largely because the story that we're telling you today, and this is not just a story, this is fact, this is backed up by empirical evidence, it goes against the narrative. And the narrative, as we've heard, is Burma's getting better. And this is one instance where Burma is definitely not getting better. It has a deep, dark secret, which is now coming to the surface, where there is a group of people that are being targeted for elimination, for absolute elimination. And so that's what we have to hold up at the United Nations and in the press, in everything that we do. We tend to be reactive to the news, and we can't be. It goes back to this idea of being persistent and patient, and we can't just wait for a news story to provoke us into action. We have to realize that there are people suffering every day, all the time, whether it's in the news tonight or not, and be persistent and advocate on behalf of these people until they can live in their country with dignity and in safety. So we have standards, we have careful monitoring of their performance, and the only enforcement that is left to us is us. It's civil society bringing out the problem of Burmese government and society targeting the Rohingya for elimination, and to me that would come up to the definition of genocide. It's up to us to act. It's up to us to make enough noise to pressure our government, to pressure all governments, to pressure the United Nations, to raise up this issue to the level where some action really takes place. It also needs we have an obligation as people of faith to do that too. All of our faiths call on protecting the weak, the vulnerable, women and children, and it really shouldn't matter which faith these women and children belong to. When vulnerable people, when weak, helpless people who have not done anything to hurt anybody else are in danger, whether you're Buddhist or you're Christian or you're Jewish or you're Muslim or whatever you are, you ought to speak out against that. too often we tend to speak out against the atrocities of that faith over there, but when it's one of our faiths over here that, you know, maybe is our faith, or maybe a faith that we're very close to, or we think well of, you know, then we tend to soften our criticism. But we need to speak out as people of faith to protect everyone, everywhere, regardless of their faith, and particularly if they're weak and vulnerable, if they cannot defend themselves, then we, as people of faith, have to defend them. One word that has come out of our discussion so far, and it's what I want to leave you with here, is the whole concept of fear. What's being stirred up in Burma is fear of the Rohingya. It's to say they're going to have babies. The Muslims, they have 4 wives and they have babies all over the place, and they're going to take over Burma. It's building that fear, and that's the same fear that the Nazis built up against the Jews. It's the same fear that any majority group will build up against any minority group. It's building that sense of fear. These people are different, and they're doing something, and we have to be afraid of them because they're doing that. And we've got to overcome this fear, and it's combating fear. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt said the only fear we have to fear is fear itself. This is the culprit, and we've got to combat it in every possible way to give people confidence that a small minority that's oppressed in Burma bears no threat to the majority population. They are threatened by the majority population, and nobody in the majority population should look on these people with fear. But that's a knee-jerk reaction. We do it in this country. We look at the other people, and usually the other people, because of the color of their skin or their sexual orientation or whatever they might be, these are small minority groups, and we look at them with fear. We, the majority population, look at them with fear, and yet they are afraid of us. We're in the majority, and the minorities have to fear us. But we make them the object of our fear, and we have to combat that knee-jerk reaction that we all are susceptible to look at a small minority group of people who are oppressed, who cannot really defend themselves, and think of those people as something to be afraid of. That's the narrative in Burma. That's what's being peddled, that the majority population, the powerful government, the people in power with wealth and power have to fear the Rohingya, have to fear these people right here, when they really have nothing to fear from them. And in fact, the Rohingya have much to fear from the majority. So that's what we have to combat, is the whole syndrome of fear. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. And I understand, just in terms of the United Nations, that there is a new rapporteur for Burma that was just appointed last week. It was Mr. Quintana, and he had called for a special investigation for war crimes, or crimes against humanity, I think. Very strong. And now he's gone suddenly, and we have someone who's quite new to the role. And we hope that she has great shoes to fill, and we hope that she will do so. The United Nations has a very strong role to play with the NGOs and with naming and blaming and shaming and other things. Hopefully not too much gaming. But the as far as U.S. response, Barack Obama has spoken on this issue somewhat, and he said the right things, during his visit last year, and he recently, just about 2 weeks ago, also said that without including the Rohingya, there can be no success in Burma. So, he definitely is behind the idea. At least he's talking the talk. But walking the walk means having policies that really back that up.